Hello, friends. Coach Rick here. What $400 can buy? George and Louis Latimer, dates 1842, 1880, and 1928. Choices large and small, made in an instant, today often resonate through history. A sounding echo that can magnify even the simplest of actions done in the name of freedom and decency and God's Word. That is the mystery of God working through His people in their flaws. If you knew, for instance, that $400, a lot more money back in 1842, could not only buy a man's freedom and likely save his life, but open the door of opportunity, a generation later, to one of the finest minds of the late 19th century, would you spend it? Of course you would. What if you had no foresight? What would be the price you'd be willing to pay for life and for freedom? Dr. Reverend Caldwell, a black pastor, and the Tremont Temple Baptist Society understood that, when faced with such a choice, the price could never be too high to intercede. $400 from the congregation deprived many of food, maybe even clothing, for a season, but it bought the freedom of George Latimer, an escaped slave who had known only days of liberty after his flight north. George Latimer chafed at the shackles of his slavehood. Owned by James B. Gray, an abusive master who owned a store near Norfolk, Virginia, but who made money mostly through the exchange of stolen goods and by selling liquor to black men, Latimer often stared at his bare arms and thought, "Can this flesh belong to any man as horses do?" On October 4th, 1842, Latimer and his wife Rebecca finally had their opportunity. Latimer had tried to escape before, even making it to Baltimore once, but was always caught. This time proved just as perilous. After managing to stow away on one ship headed north, Latimer and his wife later had to board a second ship that would take them to Baltimore. Cramped and worn already from the stress, he knew they had no hope of stealing onto this ship. They'd have to come up with another plan. In an instant, Latimer had it. "Hide in plain sight," he told his wife. She just bit her lip. George Latimer was a high yellow slave, almost as light-skinned as any sun-darkened sailor. Approaching the vessel, Latimer knew his best option would simply be to pretend he was white and to use part of the money he'd saved to buy a cabin compartment. Black Quaker hat perched on his head and cloak drawn up to his neck, he and Rebecca walked as tall as they could up the gangway. Nobody even glanced their direction. This might work. Suddenly, atop the entrance, a broad-shouldered man draped in a black cloak as charcoal stood facing the gathering passengers as though searching for someone. Latimer saw his face and almost froze. It was a liquor salesman who'd sold rum and whiskey and rye to Latimer's master. And so close to freedom. George and Rebecca had no option. Part of the surging crowd, they mounted the gangway, and Latimer simply pulled his hat low over his brow and passed onto the ship safely. They hadn't been spotted. Half an hour later, anchors were raised, and George and Rebecca sat in their first-class cabin, free as they had ever been in their life. In Baltimore, Latimer continued to pose as a white gentleman, Rebecca as a servant, and they maintained the charade until Philadelphia, after which they went forth as free citizens of the United States, man and wife. Anxious to be as far away from Virginia as they could, the Latimers found themselves in Boston, but the dream of freedom ended quickly. They'd been spotted during their escape, and James Gray arrived in Boston shortly after George and Rebecca. With Rebecca hidden away, George still had to try to find work, and during one excursion he was spotted and arrested on a false charge of larceny without any legal process. He was placed in prison, and James began securing their transportation back to Virginia, never expecting the firestorm of protest to follow. Over the next days and weeks, the town of Boston exploded with indignation. White abolitionists held meetings and demanded that legislation be enacted to protect fugitive slaves. Free black men, almost 300 in total, surrounded the courthouse to demand that Latimer not be taken from the state unless due justice was performed. The judge and the police alike were in a quandary. James Gray would not leave without Latimer. Latimer swore he'd rather die than return to slavery. The charge of larceny had been dropped as being completely without basis, yet Latimer was still incarcerated. More protests arose. Threats were made by every side until finally a compromise was reached and James Gray agreed to return to Virginia without his slave for the sum of $400. One generous congregation had come through with a sacrificial donation, and as Latimer was released and left prison, he enjoyed his first true steps as a free man. George Latimer's incarceration sparked one of the key turning points in the abolitionist movement. With the city still at full voice, more than 60,000 citizens signed a petition calling for the protection of fugitive slaves. The legislators soon picked up the cause and passed a law calling for the same. Massachusetts had deepened its separation from the South, and the inevitable march toward the Civil War took one more step forward. But the Latimer case was more than just a benchmark for black freedom. The price of $400 also enabled George Latimer to stay in a place of opportunity and freedom while starting a family. He and Rebecca had 3 sons. Not that life was simple or easy by any means. Slave hunters prowled the northern states, capturing blacks and returning them to the South they may have never lived in. As a well-known freed slave, George Latimer was particularly nervous and tried his hardest to keep his wife and 3 sons safe. His youngest boy, Lewis, was born in 1848, 6 years after George's escape. But it would be another 10 years until George felt secure enough to send the obviously intelligent boy to his first schooling in 5th grade. When Lewis turned 12, the first shots rained down on Fort Sumter and a new era rose in the United States. Following his older brothers, Lewis enrolled in the Union forces as soon as he could, serving in the Navy on a blockade ship. His service and the sacrifice of thousands of other blacks who fought and died for the cause of freedom convinced Lewis that all races needed to be treated equally in the sight of God. As well, Lewis believed that the place of African Americans was not to be segregated or isolated, but to serve and live alongside all races as Americans. He lived out his philosophy upon his return to Boston after the war. Employed by the patent solicitors Crosby and Gould, Latimer soon discovered his natural passion and talent for drafting. His unparalleled skill eventually placed him in the partnership with Alexander Graham Bell. Working together with the inventor, Latimer crafted the patent drawings that filled Bell's applications. As other groups rushed to secure similar technology, it was the proficiency, hard work, and dedication of the 2 men that helped Bell place his patent mere hours ahead of his competition. Lewis Latimer's star was on the rise. Employed by some of the brightest minds of the era, Latimer soon found himself in the electric light industry, working for Hiram Maxim. Here it wasn't only his technical skills that were displayed, but his creative genius as well. Latimer invented and patented a process by which the carbon filaments for incandescent lamps could be made to last exponentially longer and thus reduce the cost of running electric light. Soon he was traveling the world, bringing electricity to the street lamps of major cities, including New York City, Philadelphia, and London. Latimer's proficiency, knowledge, and hard work soon caught the eye of the foremost inventive mind of his time, Thomas Edison. Latimer was hired as a chief draftsman and patent expert. The only African American in a group of 24 men known as Edison pioneers, Latimer often served as the primary witness in the prosecution of Edison patent infringement cases. Just years before, his own father had been able to gain even a voice in the justice system, and now major legal copyright decisions were being made based on the words of his son. It was in Latimer's own hand that a great many of the Edison patents were submitted for approval. Lewis Latimer's life of hard work, common sense, and devotion to his family, his community, his call, and his nation served as an inspiration for the great things of this country could truly accomplish if freedom were accorded to all men and women, regardless of race. Let me rephrase that. Lewis Latimer's life of hard work, common sense, and devotion to his family, his community, his call, and his nation served as an inspiration for the great things this country could truly accomplish if freedom were accorded to all men and women, regardless of race. In Lewis Latimer, whose future was bought with $400 by an unheralded pastor following the will of God, all could see the realization of why the battle over slavery was one worth fighting. Lewis Latimer helped cities shine with a light created by men. his own life, including a church he founded in his community, shone with the life of the Creator, with the light of the Creator, who values men far more than any price one could put on them. What a story. Each time a person stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from million different centers of energy and daring, these ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Robert F. Kennedy. My friends, 1842. We're at 2021. I am worried about our country right now. I am worried that we are about to be split so far down the middle and away from our principles and our Constitution that we will not recover. The story I just read to you is a story from the 1800s that brought us away from segregation and eventually away from slavery, eventually away from segregation again, away from racism, and away from a country divided by race. And today, the racism thing is being raised up again in a way that may destroy this country completely, because they are now wanting to tear down everything this country was built upon because of its ancient warts that seem to be being used for political gain. What is happening right now is destroying our Constitution. It's destroying the freedoms that we have to hold our government at bay. We have all worked very, very hard to eliminate the racism that had plagued our country for most of its time in existence. And we continue today to work hard to make sure that racism continues to be eliminated from all corners of our loving country. And yet, we are now being beaten down and attacked at every opportunity as a racist country. No other country on the planet has been working so any harder to provide opportunity to knock down barriers, to eliminate poverty than the United States of America. Yes, we still have problems to work out. Yes, we need to continue to move away from this caste, this class, this elitist kind of system, and we are getting there. People like myself and Cheyenne and Don and others are trying to help ourselves and others to learn how to break away from and stay out of the tyrannical grip of an oppressive government. And we are trying to help others to be as independent and self-reliant as we can. And at every turn, these people who want to destroy our freedoms are gaining power. What is happening right now is an awful turn of events. We are not in any position where we can just sit and continue to be led like sheep by this change in government that has actually been going on for many, many years. I don't know if this video is even going to last through the review process where I'm going to post it. I'm not going to say any names of anybody on here. I'm only going to say that I am a patriotic American who is not a racist, who understands, being 63 years old, what our country has come from through. I was born in 1957. I am old enough and young enough to remember everything that we came through from the 60s through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s to where we are now. And how dare you call me a racist after all I've been through? I do not have white privilege. I do not have anything in my heart that is anything ill toward any race. And matter of fact, I'm envious of many of my black and yellow people for what they have been given the opportunity to do in our country. I'm happy for them. I'm glad that they're getting what they're getting. I would not want to have to trade places with them for what they have had to endure. I have empathy for that entire unfortunate circumstance that got them over here. But now they're here. They have equality beyond belief. And how dare you call me a racist? And how dare you call my country racist? We have had a few things happen that are being rectified that do not need to be rectified by tearing this entire country apart, by eliminating our right to keep and bear arms against a tyrannical government, to take away our right to free speech, to take away our right to assemble, to take our right away to practice our religion, whatever that may be. Our rights are being stripped away by the stroke of every pen. Every time that pen touches paper and strokes away another piece of our rights, we are losing our ability to be free. And you know it, and we know it, and we're sitting here and we're allowing it to happen. This is no longer conspiracy theory bullshit. This is actually happening. Every time that person stands up and makes a speech that tells lies, that they're not taking away our rights, it's a lie. Every time that person opens up their mouth, it's lying. And I don't know how much longer the people that voted that way are going to continue to allow that to happen. I find it hard to believe that patriotic Americans who enjoy their freedoms are really, really, really looking toward and forward to losing your freedoms. Do you not understand, and have you not been on this planet long enough to know what a government in complete control of your life is going to do? Do you not understand that the only thing that keeps them from entirely taking control of your life is your ability to keep and bear arms, your ability to speak freely, and your ability to petition the government? Those rights are being stripped away every day. Technology is stripping away your right to be heard. Media is stripping away your right to speak and be heard. I don't know if you know what a puppet dictator is, but I don't think you got to look very far right now to find one. I am angry. I am disappointed. I am frustrated. Back those days up to where people were, I've been watching this series, Eliminate the Brutes, Eliminate All the Brutes. America was not founded on those principles. America was founded to get away from those principles that these people are trying to say we're founded on. We've been evolving as a country to get away from that kind of thinking. And how dare you try to put that on me, a white of European ancestry. I do not have that in my heart. I'm a veteran. Are you? Are you the people that are voting our freedoms away? Are you even have any idea of what a veteran does, what a veteran believes, what we've sworn an oath to do for this country? Do you legislators even have a clue about what it means to stand up for your country and the freedoms that it stands for? Because I can tell you right now that right now I am trembling at my roots at what is being happened with every stroke of that pen. The corruption is just rampant. It was being eliminated, and with the stroke of pens, it's being put right back in. What are you going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I am one seriously upset patriot. What we're experiencing right now has never been happening in the history of our country. And I don't know why. It's things like this, you know, and we really have to be careful what we say these days, because we're censored. We're called insurrectionists. Whatever we're called for standing up for the rights that this country's built on. I say no. We can't stand for this. How many more people out there understand what is happening right now? Do you understand what is happening? Do you understand what is happening? And are you just going to let it happen? Within the next 6 months, we will no longer be a free country. You will no longer have any rights. That's what's happening right now. Never has anyone been allowed. If our previous president had done what this guy's doing with a stroke of a pen as many times as he's done it, they'd be ready to impeach him right now. They'd have his ass in front of a court right now. Why do we not have this person in front of a court right now impeaching him? There's got to be something that says he's breaking the Constitution by being a dictator. No one is bringing that up in the news. No one is saying that this guy is proclaiming that he is now the undisputed single leader of the United States of America. No due process, no legislation in process, no voting, no considerations, nothing. Just stroking a pen. My law says what it is. I'm the ruler of this country. I am your emperor. That is what's happening right now. And I want to know why nobody's doing anything to stop it.